Again, it's great to meet you. Thank you for taking a minute up for the program today. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Thank you for chatting to me.
Yes, sir. So before we get into your life as a former TV exec, poker, and all of these wonderful things that you're doing, I want to begin with this. 6 years ago, this pandemic was changing the world, changing our whole landscape. How did you get through that era, and how has it changed the way that you do things today?
Um, the obvious answer, kind of that, and having heard many of your previous interviews and guests, is, obviously that was a era-defining moment. I mean, for me, working in TV at the time, everything kind of stopped. Um, and it was very much compounded with, following up on that with, a writer's strike. And the TV industry's had all kinds of upheavals that have been very difficult for it to deal with, and to some extent are still dealing with, both in terms of the kind of corporate consolidation that's going on. Now we've got the rise of AI and how that's kind of impacting jobs in the industry. So I was somebody whose job was very much connected to reading the tea leaves. I had a lot of international TV clients, and part of my job, which dealt somewhat with acquisitions and co-productions, was also dealing with just general trends in the industry and sort of reading the tea leaves of where the industry was going. And I could sort of see the writing on the wall in a certain areas, and certainly that it was going to impact my life personally in terms of um, so I very much started to kind of think about, well, what are my other kind of passions? What do I believe in life? How do I want to make a change and make a difference? Um, if you like, it was a sort of start of my own kind of journey of sort of reinvention. Um, and I'd always, I've obviously been heavily involved, had this kind of twin track of being a TV executive and working in the poker world. And it kind of led me to think about the kind of connection between the two, and the fact that what I do in my life and what everyone does in their life is to sort of try and make correct decisions that will benefit their lives. The job of kind of, I think, leaders is to make correct decisions. Above anything else, that um, is the kind of number one thing that separates good leaders from the rest, is the ability to make correct decisions. And that can be done in a multiple number of ways, simply by hiring good people that you trust and rely on. But um, all of those things are kind of fall under the umbrella of making good decisions. And that is exactly what you do in poker, basically. When I ask, I used to teach for the World Poker Tour when we did these boot camps, and we always used to start the seminars by asking people what the object of poker was. And people would raise their hands and inevitably say, "Oh, the object of poker is to win money, or the object of poker is to have fun." And all of those things are true, but the true object of poker is to make correct decisions. And if you make enough correct decisions over the course of your poker career, then you will be successful and a winning player. But what people tend to kind of ignore or not kind of realize is that we're very, as human beings, we're very outcome driven. So, we tend to naturally think that if a good outcome happens in our life, oh, it's because we make good decisions. Or if a bad outcome happened in our life, it must be because of some bad decisions we made. And that's not actually correct. And that's not correct in life, and it's not correct in poker, because you can make good decisions and still have a bad outcome, because there's a thing called luck that
Yeah.
affects both poker and life. Um, and the same is true the other way. You can make a bad decision, and still get a good result because you get lucky. And so one of the things that we very much focus on in the winning hand when you leadership training business is to very much focus on the process of decision making, to understand how to break that down, and to try and help people to make better decisions. And again, over the course of your lifetime, if you the more good decisions you make, the better outcomes you will have over the long run. But it is over the long run. People, and that's why poker is such an incredible kind of metaphor for business, and there's nothing like it. because you're dealing with incomplete information. And again, that's what life and business is like. You're never dealing with perfect information. It's very hard to find a situation where 100% of the time something will definitely work out some way. It's almost impossible to be 100% sure of anything. Um, so in poker, that you can really kind of hone in on that aspect, to deal with, like, as I say, kind of putting the pieces together as much as possible to make correct decisions with the information that you have at the time. But that information is always going to be incomplete. There's a quote from Jeff Bezos, actually, who says, like, I'll probably mangle the quote, but it's along the lines of, like, you're always making decisions with incomplete information, and you should probably make the decision that you want to make with about 70% of the information that's available. If you wait until you have 90% of the information, you've probably waited too long to make that decision.
Yeah, for sure. So let's get into the nuts and bolts of what you do on a daily basis. And kids always pull the truth out of us. I'm going to put you in a classroom. It's career day. And one of the kids wants to know what you do for a living. How do you make it make sense to them?
Well, the interesting thing about that is, funnily enough, I've actually taught after school classes of poker to kids of about that age.
Yeah.
Um, and it's incredible because they're having fun. So it's like hiding the broccoli, in the sense of, you are, through this really fun game, teaching them core life fundamental skills, about, obviously, at that age, you're sort of teaching a little bit of math without them really realizing it, because you're teaching them about odds and probabilities and things like that. Um, and B, I think above anything at that age, you're kind of teaching them critical life skills about controlling the controllables, um, about discipline, about reading a room, about how, as I say, in life, there's the things you can control and the things you can't control,
Yeah.
and learning how to, put aside the things that you can't control, uh, to have emotional regulation about that, um, and to focus on just the things that you can control. And that is obviously a really important kind of executive functioning skill for kids of that age, but also for human beings as a whole of any age. We're all subject to those kind of emotions, and frustrations in life. And again, so poker is an incredible way to be able to sit down and actually put those into action. So I know I sort of slightly tangentially answered your question in terms of, what I would tell the 13-year-olds, but in a way, I would tell the 13-year-olds by doing it. And I think that's one of the most important things, and the thing that separates my leadership training program from others. A lot of leadership training programs obviously have fantastic information, and I'm certainly not knocking any of those programs, but what you don't always get in these situations is the ability to actually do, to act. Um, and so the thing that we do at the Winning Hand is to actually get participants, whether they're 13 or 30 or 60, to sit at a poker table and play hands of poker. No money's changing hands. We play with chips. It's not gambling, but it forces people to make decisions in real time, and to actually put into action their decision-making process, their thought process. And facilitators, expert facilitators, myself obviously being one of them, can stop the action at any point at key critical moments and say, okay, why did you do that? What was going on in your mind? What was your plan? What was your strategy? What were you hoping would happen? So we kind of force you to sort of analyze your own decision-making process in real time, and be able to stop and say, well, have you thought about this? And these are things that you could do better. And obviously, by actually doing and practicing, that information becomes a lot more sticky, a lot more kind of can be a lot more, resonates a lot more with our participants, in terms of, like, oh wow, I didn't realize that I did that, and that forces me to kind of rethink how I go about my daily decision making process. There's actually studies by McKinsey that say that only 11% of people think that leadership training programs are actually very effective. And, my hypothesis is that's because you don't actually get the opportunity to sort of put a lot of the teachings into practice. And that's sort of one of the gaps that we're trying to fill with our program is that actually makes you do rather than just listen. And I think that's what makes it so effective. Um, and Also, as I say, like ability to kind of retain the information. And you're doing it whilst playing a game that's ridiculously fun. And
Yeah.
there's again a lot of studies that show that game-based learning is one of the most effective ways that you can learn.
So you've had a very interesting and varied career. I'm curious in the very beginnings when you were a kid in school at career day, what was your dream gig? What did you want to be when you grew up?
So it's easy to play kind of hindsight and kind of go, oh, this was always what I was supposed to do. Because, there's a number of things from my kind of youth that make complete sense to me now. Um, on the TV side, just, I was actually always not just an avid consumer of TV, but massive. My biggest passion early on was kind of stand-up comedy, and a lot of the early gigs that I did in TV were working, producing comedy shows for UK networks and things like that. But aside from that, from more relevant to what I'm doing now, there were three kind of uh, critical things that, as I say, make complete sense now. Number one, I was a junior chess champion. So I always had game theory and game strategy kind of baked into my, understanding. And that's really relevant, but I will, as I say that, I do also want to make this point because a lot of people will say to me, well, isn't chess a better metaphor for life and business in terms of, strategy and skill? And it's like, yeah, I mean, it's relevant, obviously, but unlike poker, chess is a game pretty much of complete information. You can see the entire board, and in any given situation, there is pretty much always an optimal move. There's almost zero luck involved in the game of chess. So actually, chess and life are not the best kind of comparables in terms of one being a metaphor for the other. The second thing is I'm sure we all did summer jobs as a kid, to earn some extra pennies. Um, you want to know what my summer job was?
That
I worked in a bookmaker's. Um, in England, high street bookmakers are prevalent everywhere. It's all very legal and regulated. So my summer job was I worked in a bookmaker's, and it was in a pre-digital age. So what you had to do was there'd be all the horse races, and there'd be a list of all the horses that would just simply be printed on bits of paper that I slapped onto the magnetic board, and over the tannoy, they'd announce what the odds were. So it would be like, Red Beauty 5-1. I'm 5-1, and mark that on the board, etc. And then the odds would change. So I had this again, like complete early understanding of how odds worked and a kind of understanding of kind of that aspect of sort of life in terms of odds and probabilities. And it was a great summer job. I loved it. Um,
yeah.
and and then when I went to college, the degree I did was in social psychology. So that kind of added the extra layer of kind of now you're dealing with understanding or trying to understand how human beings behave, and all aspects of how that relates, obviously, to poker, which is sort of self-explanatory. So, you know, not that obviously when I was, 15 or whatever, I said, oh, one day I'm going to work in a poker leadership training program.
Yeah.
I did not have that kind of foresight, but looking back, you add up those pieces together, it's like, oh, this makes perfect sense that I am where I am.
So who'd you look up to? Who are people that you emulated that were inspirational forces that have allowed you to navigate and evolve to where you're at today?
Um, it's hard to sort of put my finger on any particular people in that world. I mean, we're very fortunate when I worked for the World Poker Tour Boot Camp, um, and as an instructor there, and that was sort of very much on the basis of I was very much an online poker player at the time, more than anything else, and sort of taught aspects of the courseware that in that, and then expanded to uh, take over much more of the teaching generally. But was very, very fortunate that I got to work alongside some of the biggest names in poker. So, we were teaching alongside, some of the top pros in the world, um, all of whom were, tremendously helpful and inspirational in terms of not just understanding the poker world more, but um, just as kind of mentors that help my game evolve an enormous amount, including people like Mike Sexton, who rest in peace, who was the presenter for the World Poker Tour at the time, and an absolutely terrific guy. Who it was like an incredible experience to be able to just spend weekends with these top pros and be able to talk about the game and their understanding not just of um, how specific hands play, but also the kind of overall framework for poker teaching. In the kind of more recently, I'd say, and this isn't somebody I know, but somebody whose books I've read and have taken a lot of inspiration from. Excuse me. There's a former poker player called Annie Duke, um, who some people in America might know because she was, I think, famously finished runner-up uh, to Piers Morgan, I think, in a series of the Celebrity Apprentice at the
Okay.
time.
Okay.
Can't remember who the presenter was at the time. Some bloke. I'm not sure what he's gone on to do.
Yeah, right.
Um, but and by the way, very incorrectly, Annie Duke didn't win because she was by far the best person on that
Of
show at the time.
course.
She was like miles ahead of everyone else
It
because
it was always written on the wall.
yeah, yeah, but she wasn't, I don't know,
Too
she
qualified.
wasn't, yeah, exactly. So, Annie's written, now become a kind of absolute expert in the art of decision making and has written some incredible books. I've got one right here. It's called Thinking in Bets.
Yeah.
Um, and uh, I think her work is amazing in terms of and she's uh, started a kind of decision institute that is also going back to what you're saying about schools. I think the kind of process of decision making is I know a lot of schools are kind of trying to put in place executive functioning classes and everything like that, but teaching kids at an early age about the decision making process would be incredibly valuable as a kind of thing. And even this book, Thinking in Bets, I think is a really, as a whole premise is brilliant in terms of when you think about a decision, what is a decision? Just kind of breaking it down to the kind of core meaning of what decision is. And she frames it that, really, when you think about it, a decision is a bet on an unknown future. Um, and actually, interestingly, when you get people to consider decisions as bets, it brings incredible accountability to that decision-making process in ways that they wouldn't necessarily have otherwise. Excuse me. So there have been, studies that show that when people treat their decisions and literally mentally frame their decisions as bets, their decisions actually get better and a lot more accurate. Um, So, if I had to pick anyone in terms of, directly answering your question, I would say that in terms of the work I'm doing now, that Annie Duke has probably, provided some of the biggest inspiration in terms of like tuning my brain even further into to what I'm trying to achieve with the winning hand.
So when you look at your career and you look at the backbone of what you're teaching people, which is, you know, um, taking all of these elements of making a decision, when you look at your career, what is the biggest risk that you took in your career?
Wow. That's a big question. I'm going to go with a twofold answer, I suppose. Um, I would say, look, the one is a bit more g general, but I worked with Channel 4 for 17 years as their consultant for acquisitions and co-productions, and every decision that we make in that respect is a kind of perfect analogy. One of the main functions of what I did was to help them decide which American TV shows we would acquire. Um, because Channel 4 showed a reasonable amount of American content and historically has done so, uh, starting, including Friends and ER and The West Wing and shows like that that aired in the UK. But we, when we do that, when Channel 4 bought an American TV show, it's again exactly the same kind of process as you might have at the poker table. You're making an investment and hoping to get a return on that investment by obviously that show being a big hit in England and generating the advertising revenue, etc. And those investments are, often for millions of dollars in each particular time. And you're making that decision based on the fact of basically there'd be a thing called LA screenings that would go to every year where the studios would show their content before it aired on TV in America. And we are deciding basically on the basis of that one pilot episode whether it's a show we would try and bid for. Um, Now, my job, as much as anything, was to gather as much information about that show, where it was going to go in future episodes, future seasons, who's in the show, who's directing it, um, try and get as many scripts as I can of future scripts. I would actually try and get the scripts in advance and give us advance notice as to whether that show I thought was going to pan out. Is that show going to be a hit in America? Is that show going to be a hit in England? All those kind of bits of gathering that information in order to make a correct decision as to whether that show was worth investing in, as well as competing with rival networks to acquire that show and trying to read what your competitors were going to do in that situation. Enter a negotiation because every hand of poker that you play is a negotiation, and you have to kind of listen to the conversation of the betting to see, how that negotiation is going to play out. So, I wouldn't pick any individual show, but I would just say, broadly speaking, my job involved those kind of risks, on a regular basis. Um, I don't like to talk about it because it's a sort of, you know, personal moment in my life, but I was involved in a big thing in the world of poker. Um, I'm sure, people can Google it. Um, where I had a deal with somebody in the 2006 World Series of Poker, um, to split the winnings with somebody who went on to win the tournament, for a lot of money. And that basically ended up in a lawsuit.
Wow.
Um, and I had to make, so in terms of specifically answering your question with one specific thing, that was an incredibly difficult and big decision as to whether I was going to go legal in
Yeah.
that situation. I'm a Brit. We are not a particularly litigious society in the same way that America seems to be. So it was an incredibly scary and unfamiliar process and thing to go through. Um, so making that decision to do that based on the kind of risks that are involved in any lawsuit was a huge deal for me. Um, and like I said, I don't really like to kind of talk about it too much. It was all, settled out of court in the end, but it was the correct decision, in my opinion. And again, and not that I necessarily thought about it at the time, but with hindsight, was again exactly the kind of high stakes decision that you would make at the poker table in
Yeah.
terms of, thinking about all the range of possible outcomes because every decision has a range of possible outcomes, and trying to, assign probabilities to those outcomes. And those, those outcomes can obviously be directly financial, but they're not all financial. Or, some decisions are reputational and have other consequences that one has to consider that can be just as important as the money side of things. So, um, yeah, that would be the one.
So let's flip this question into when you look back on your career, what are you the proudest of? What are you the happiest about?
So, I used to produce TV shows in England, and I, I was very proud of some of the stuff that I produced in that regard. You really wasn't expecting that question,
Uh,
um, and I'm trying to pinpoint a single thing which I'm struggling to do, um, in that regard.
I
From a
can
because
I can
well,
pivot.
no, it's just I'm just taking a moment.
Yeah, no, you're fine.
Uh, I because I'm it's just I suppose over the course of my TV life there are a number of things that I am proud of without being able to necessarily single out,
Sure.
anything. I mean, it's like if you said to me, "Oh, which show that you acquired for Channel 4 are you most proud of?" I could answer that question. Probably would be Homeland, which at the time nobody else was really kind of jumping on that bandwagon, and I was very adamant that that was something that we should invest in, and turned out to be a huge hit for Channel 4. So that would be a sort of specific example. In England, I produced 7 series of a show called The People versus Jerry Sadowitz, which was done on a minuscule budget that was a big hit that I was very proud of. Um, but in a way, I sort of pivot back to what I'm doing now because I think it was a bold decision to, start a kind of entirely new career later on in life, and relates back to your opening question of, COVID and post-COVID, and being able to kind of read the room and say, all right, I think there's a limited time span on what's happening in TV, that because of the changes in the TV industry, the lifespan of what I do is probably not long. So, coming up with the idea for the winning hand and being able to put it into practice and see its results. I mean, I have a co-founder, Haley Babcock, that I'm going to give a shout out to because she's magnificent. And that came about because I presented a one of my workshops last year, um, and to a diverse group of women, of executives, um, and it went incredibly well. Again, to that point of like, the sort of feedback in the room was, we've been on a lot of leadership training programs, and this is the first one that um, feels like it's actually been consequential and will make me go away tomorrow and think about the way I behave and the way I make decisions. And Haley, who's someone I've known for a while anyway from the TV industry, kind of came up and said, "What this is, this is incredible. What are you doing with it?" Uh, and I was like, "Well, I've got the product, which I love. I'm still figuring out how to scale it." And she was like, "I can help with that." Um, and we've kind of subsequently gone into business together to make it happen. And I think that gives me incredible pride that it's like it directly affected somebody in a way that has made her, want to. There's no bigger compliment to doing something to somebody who says, I want to be a part of that.
Yeah,
Um, so
I love it. So the winning hand's a brilliant concept. If anybody wants to get involved, they want to reach out, they want to learn more, they want to get into that world, how do they do that? What's the best way to do it?
probably just through the website. That's www.the-winning-hand.com.
Okay.
You can reach out through that, and there's all the information about the programs that we offer, and getting more deeply into the specifics of the kind of takeaways that we expect you to have if you arrange a training program for us in terms of the actual specifics of the things that we train and teach.
I will put that, I'll make it easy. I'll put that link in the show notes. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much for taking a minute out to talk about a fascinating career, this wonderful concept you're putting out in the world. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Really appreciate it, Joe. Thanks so much for having me.
Yes, sir.